Are you a fan of so-called RPGs? You heard me right. I said so-called RPGs because I truly believe that nowadays this acronym has lost all its original meaning and have become so vague that nobody understands how to define it anymore. Like the word drama that is still used to describe, for example, The Godfather, Oppenheimer, Gladiator, and Bridgerton. Don't worry, this video is not all just rant about how RPGs used to be better, it's only 30% that. Other 60% is some ideas on what should we use to describe our games, and the rest is just random memes. Hi, I'm Not-a-witchr, and I'm still not very good at cosplay. But do not lose all hope yet, because there might be something interesting in this video. I'm saying might be, because I'm not very sure myself. Here are the 3 reasons why it would be better if we abandon the old game genre names like the RPG acronym and use another principle instead. As I've already said, the RPG is used so broadly and freely that in some cases you literally can't find any common features between 2 games that are called RPGs. For example, take 2 recent high-profile games, Dragon Age: The Veilguard and Kingdom Come: Deliverance II. One is total fantasy with magic everywhere, the other is historical realism with washing your face in a trough. One lets you create your own character from scratch, their race, detailed appearance, story background and class, and the other one gives you Henry. From the other hand, concerning players' agency, one game lets you make important decisions that heavily affect the story in complicated and unexpected ways, and the other one gives you very few and very symmetrical real choices that have no effect on the main story and basically only affect which character you'll be able to have sex with. Not that it isn't important. One game have a third-person camera, the other is played in first-person except for the cutscenes. One game has a fast-paced combat full of movement and special abilities, but with tactical pause. The other game has its unique combat system, best suited for careful duels, and in other cases, stealthy archery. And finally, one game got very mixed player response, to put it lightly, when the other game is praised as one of the best games of the last years and instantly became a definite contender for the Game of the Year award. I could go on and list many more ways in which Dragon Age: The Veilguard and Kingdom Come: Deliverance II are different, but you got the idea. Again, both games are called RPGs, and they have nothing in common. So, a casual gamer would have to put some time and effort to understand what those games are like before trying them, and they would probably get confused by the name of the genre. And if you would argue that The Veilguard is more like action RPG and comes from a line of classic RPGs from the masters of the genre, I would say both yes and no, and it doesn't matter. Wouldn't it be better if we had more specific characteristics for our games? Maybe we should focus on the type of gameplay that is the main focus of the game and not on its genealogy tree. The perfect example, shooter. It says what most of your playtime will be like and at the same time hints that the game will have ranged weapons, mostly or exclusively. Useful. In some cases, the term RPG is used by the public and even by some carefree game journalists in referral to some elements of the game that may be similar to what we had in other games that are usually called RPGs, like the development of skills through gaining experience. I've heard some YouTubers call Assassin's Creed Origins an RPG when it came out, a game with no character creation, pre-scripted cutscenes with 0 dialogue choices and only one ending, and they were calling it a role-playing game? In this way, any game is a game where you play some role. Definitely every game where you have a protagonist, and even the strategy games. You may think that there is no protagonist in some of those, But in most of the cases, you are really playing a deity in those worlds who decides what course the history will take. Isn't that a role you play? I've always been irritated by the use of another term, roguelike, which only means that a game has a specific feature of permadeath of the main character or the whole party, after which the player has to start their playthrough over, in some cases with some benefits tied to their previous run. But in the case with roguelikes, the term is referring to the crucial mechanic of a game that is very important to know before you even buy it. Are you prepared to start over and over again like the early console games? I would like to know in advance. I mean, the term is still bad because when used as a genre, it can include, for example, games like Hades, where the protagonist is immortal and the cycle of failing and returning to the beginning is the main mechanism of the story progression. And also, it can include the games like The Darkest Dungeon, where you will lose some or all your characters permanently and have to deal with it, which is why I could not finish the game. I get really attached to my characters. But back to the RPGs. The original role-playing games were tabletop, and the name means that each player took the role of a character and played only with that one, except for the Dungeon Master, of course. And when the early computers got involved, those early RPGs were trying to recreate a specific experience of tabletop games. And they still are sometimes. Ever wondered why Baldur's Gate 3 is so complicated and weird? 'Cause it's D&D! So what I mean is, a game genre could describe a type of experience or a feeling that the game tries to create. The perfect example, horror. It simply means that the game will try to wreck your nerves, and highly sensitive people definitely should avoid them. Useful. If you are a hardcore old-school gamer, you may find it hard to relate to the problems that only casual gamers or newly turned gamers have. Imagine that you are so tired that you just don't have the stamina to learn the ropes of the new system to play a game like Baldur's Gate or Pathfinder, but would like to play some fantasy still. Many games give players an option to automatically choose the best stats and builds, how I despise that word, to simplify the process and let the player focus on the story or just not to overwhelm them with the information. The inventory alone can be a downturner for some people. I myself had such cases when I just had to put a game in the later box and be completely in love with it when I returned in a better state of mind. Well, as it turns out, some casual gamers consider RPGs to be harder and more complicated than many other genres, which sometimes may be completely undeserved and inaccurate. Of course, there are games like Avowed that have their progression system in the center of the player's combat capabilities, but there are also games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which, while being an RPG, can be easily played without paying much attention to the stats and inventory, because it basically has no inventory limit and you can have access to everything you've found at all times. So that's the third reason why I propose to abolish the outdated acronym RPG and describe video games in a different manner. I am not a game developer, nor am I a game journalist, and my personal opinion is just that, my opinion. But hear me out. What if we compose the name of the genre from two things? The type of experience, or maybe the feeling that the game tries to create, and the type of the core gameplay element that the player is mostly doing while playing the game, or rather the type of interaction with the world of the game. Now, I've prepared a Microsoft Excel table. Just kidding, I've made a fun and totally not boring table that have the first element in the rows and the second in the columns, so you can classify almost any game by this principle. For example, Call of Duty games would be action shooters, surprise surprise, but Mass Effect would be closer to an epic shooter, while Overwatch or Marvel Rivals would be a competitive shooter. But these ones are kinda obvious. What about, let's say, Dark Souls series or Elden Ring? I would call them persistence slashers, because one has to have a lot of persistence to play them, and that would be the main type of mindset one needs to succeed in them. And yes, some additional descriptors can be added before the name of the genre, like in the case of Elden Ring you would add open world. And also it would make sense to add the type of setting the game has. So in the end it should be a dark fantasy open world persistence slasher. Wouldn't you agree that it describes Elden Ring better than open-world Souls-like for the gamers that have vague idea what does a Souls-like mean and don't have a nerdy friend to explain it to them? This way we can abandon the non-descriptive letters RPG and put these games in a separate genres with other games that they have much more in common. For example, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is being called an open-world RPG. But I think it's better described as an open-world epic slasher, maybe with stealth elements, because who are we kidding, you can't raid a monastery stealthily. I would also use epic slasher to describe God of War. And Dragon Age the Veilguard would also be an epic slasher, because its combat is the main part of playing through the game. You can't even open crates without smashing them. And it really tries sometimes to be God of War, just look at how you're looting a chest. Much harder for me was finding the right genre for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Both parts of the genre name. Epic? I wouldn't necessarily say that. Action? Well, the pace of the game is definitely not as fast to justify that. Atmospheric? Yeah, that's more like it. With the focus on historical setting and the amazing world of the game, I would say that the main experience when playing the game is feeling immersed in the atmosphere of the world here. And the second part, not a slasher, not a shooter, not stealth, not just narrative. I would say that all activities available in the game give you a true adventure experience, which is much more appropriate than what we are used to call adventure games. And the level up system is so unintrusive and intuitive that it definitely does not qualify as the main pillar of the game, as some would say about RPGs. So, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 would be an open-world, medieval, atmospheric adventure, if you asked me. Yes, it's hard to specify sometimes, but it's just the name of the genre. It doesn't restrict what you can do with a game. For example, if you choose Give Me a Story mode in God of War, it becomes much more closer to an epic narrative game, because the combat doesn't really matter that much in this case. The hardest it would be to find the right genre for Baldur's Gate 3, because it has so much in it that it can easily take half of my descriptors for both parts. Maybe it's one of the few games that really deserve to be called a role-playing game. Yeah, this may need some work, but at least I'm trying. What do you propose? To leave it as it is? Well, I don't know about you, but I would really like to live in a world where the most serious matter on which people have disagreements is what to call a specific video game genre. Wouldn't that be nice? So, thank you for watching. Consider subscribing if you like videos like this. I'm still Not-a-witchr, and as always, take care and farewell.